With the first pick. With the first pick. With the first pick. Quarterback. Quarterback. Quarterback.
It's exciting to want to be a top draft pick, to be the number one draft pick, but with that blessing, there comes a curse.
Whenever you're in the conversation for the number one pick, it's obviously a dream come true.
Being selected first in the NFL draft is supposed to be a reward. It's supposed to be proof that your college career was good enough to make you the face of a franchise. It's supposed to be confirmation that at least one team believes that you can be a cornerstone for their future. But in reality, it's also an obstacle. Because let's be honest, there's a reason teams pick first, and it isn't because they were good the year before.
Find me the last quarterback to go number one, stay with the same team, and have success for 15 years.
As tough as it is to join a struggling franchise, there's one situation that's even worse.
What?
And that, my friends, is being drafted by a team that didn't even exist the year before. It's a fate only a rare few quarterbacks have faced, and neither of the recent versions have fared very well. Today we'll discuss these two unlucky gentlemen.
Sometimes when you win, you lose.
Welcome back to Unlikely Success. Like, comment, and if you're new to the channel, don't forget to subscribe. Now let's start with the obvious. Going first overall comes with some financial benefits and a major ego boost. But then reality sets in. That reality, you just landed in football Siberia. A place where free agents will only go if the money is too good to turn down. The morale is at rock bottom, and coaches are doing one of two things: desperately trying to keep their jobs or walking into a full-scale rebuild.
Spikes in hell. Spikes in pee-wee hell.
Sure, there are some exceptions, but generally, teams with the first pick are in awful shape. Now imagine being the first pick of an expansion franchise. At first, it kind of sounds like an opportunity, right? New team, fresh start, a chance to build something special because it's brand new. Nothing existed there before. That would be logical if it wasn't a football team. Football is about culture, consistency, and trusting your teammates, and none of those exist when you're starting from scratch. Not all expansion teams have been created equal either. When the NFL introduced the Jacksonville Jaguars and Carolina Panthers in 1995, they were given key advantages: extra draft picks, favorable salary cap rules, and a league that wanted them to be competitive right away. And it worked. Both teams reached a conference championship within their first two seasons. But when the Cleveland Browns were reinstated in 1999 and the Houston Texans joined in 2002, the NFL wasn't so generous. Instead of being set up for success, these teams were thrown into the deep end with rosters that barely even resembled an actual NFL squad. And unfortunately for the quarterbacks drafted to lead them, that difference proved to be career-altering. So let's take a closer look at what happened to the last two number one picks who had to carry these expansion franchises from day one.
The first thing that goes with these quarterbacks is your confidence.
Tim Couch.
The Cleveland Browns selection is from the University of Kentucky. Quarterback Tim Couch.
Tim Couch was once a name that resonated with college football greatness. Today, though, it's most associated with the words draft bust. How exactly did a college star, drafted first overall, end up with a career that left so many wondering? What if? Well, it could be that every Cleveland Browns QB becomes a what if, and not just the ones who were drafted there. It's pretty much all of them. But in Couch's case, he was the first in what is now a long lineage of failed Cleveland quarterbacks. He had been an absolute star at the University of Kentucky, where he was the centerpiece of the team's air raid offense. With Couch under center, the Wildcats were transformed into a high-scoring machine. They weren't competing for national championships, but they were doing things the university hadn't seen on a football field in a very long time. This included beating Alabama in an OT thriller in 1997. That was the first time they had beaten the Tide in 75 years. He also led them to 7 wins in 1998. Which isn't exactly setting the college football world on fire, but in Kentucky, it kind of is. They hadn't done that in 13 years. So while he wasn't winning national championships, he was proving to be a talented leader who could turn around bleak situations, and a leader like that in Cleveland was desperately needed. One thing I found interesting is that Mike Leach was the offensive coordinator for Kentucky at the time. Leach was an offensive genius who would go on to perfect the air raid passing scheme, and the first exposure at the highest levels of college football that he had was his 2 years working with Couch. RIP to one of the greatest offensive minds that football has ever seen.
What do I know? I'm a football coach. I suggest you go out and do what I do. Get out of bed, go outside, then you know.
By the end of Couch's college career, he had broken NCAA and SEC records, including his 1998 season, where he threw for 4,275 passing yards, which stood as the SEC high mark for 2 decades. He was a consensus All-American, a Heisman finalist, and the face of a revitalized Kentucky program. Couch was sitting on top of the world. But life is about change, and that is exactly what the young signal caller faced heading into the NFL. In the 1999 draft, Tim Couch was selected first overall, the first ever draft pick of the newly reinstated Cleveland Browns. The team was returning to the league as an expansion franchise after a 3-year hiatus, but the NFL was gracious enough to let them keep their team history. So technically speaking, Tim Couch was not the first ever pick of the franchise. Whatever, I'm calling him the first one. Expectations and spirits were off the charts in Cleveland. It's a rabid fan base, and they weren't exactly treated well as the last organization left. Couch wasn't just a quarterback to them. He was seen as the savior of a city desperate for a return to football glory. But the task Couch faced was monumental. Unlike established NFL teams, the Browns had no foundation. Their roster was cobbled together from an expansion draft and free agent signings. The coaching staff was inexperienced, and the offensive line, a quarterback's best friend on the football field, was notoriously weak. It wasn't just a bad situation for a rookie to enter. I firmly believe it was the worst ever, at least up until this point. The head coach Chris Palmer lasted 2 years. He won 5 total games, and he never got a chance to lead another NFL team. There was exactly 1 Pro Bowl player on the roster during Couch's entire time leading the club, and they opened his rookie season by being blown out 43-0. A game in which they spared their franchise QB from being pummeled, as he only came in the 4th quarter, when it was already 36-0. Cleveland would go on to give up 56 sacks, which was 3rd most in the league. They would have 1,002 rushing yards, which was last in the league. They lost every home game, and they started the year 0-7. Their first win would come from a flash of promise, as Couch would throw a Hail Mary that was tipped into the hands of Kevin Johnson. But hey, at this point, Cleveland fans could not be choosers. They were beggars. Sadly, this play would be the high watermark for the '99 Browns, as they finished with just 1 more win. Couch had a rookie year filled with disappointment, but he showed moments of potential when there was at least enough time to throw. Young quarterbacks who get hit early and often develop bad habits, and they start to lose confidence in themselves and their teammates. But Couch had 2 game-winning drives in the second half of his rookie season, and he finished by throwing over half his 15 touchdowns in the last 8 games he started that year. It might not have screamed Hall of Famer, but it did show some promise. The Cleveland Browns' instability during Couch's tenure cannot be overstated. Between 1999 and 2003, the team cycled a few offensive coordinators, a pair of head coaches, and roster overhauls. For a young quarterback, this lack of consistency is a recipe for disaster. Think of the consistency Tom Brady enjoyed in his career. This was the exact opposite. The coaching changes and injuries that Tim Couch would suffer led to the stunting of his development. He missed 9 games in 2000 with a broken thumb. The 2000 Cleveland Browns had the 3rd fewest points scored in a 16-game season, and a 3-13 record to show for their efforts.
Spikes in hell. Spikes in pee-wee hell.
But Couch led 2 of their victories, so I guess there's that. Look, I'm just trying to highlight some positives here, because the new Browns were just plain bad, and it was ruining a potential franchise QB. Couch appeared competent enough to win games. He had the athletic profile, came from a well-coached offense in college, but poor roster construction to this degree cannot be overcome. 2001 would start a turnaround for the Browns as Butch Davis came in and brought Bruce Arians with him as the offensive coordinator. It would lead to the best numbers in Couch's career, with 3,040 yards and 17 touchdowns, but he also had a career high 21 interceptions. Arians famously employs a no-risk-it, no-biscuit strategy though, so the uptick in interceptions is to be expected. These Browns were competitive for the first time in their new iteration and probably should have been 8-8 if it wasn't for whatever that was that happened in Jacksonville that year. Weird. The year was at least a step in the right direction. 2002 would be the 2nd season under Arians and Davis for Couch, and he would play marginally better statistically, but the real difference for the team was that for the first time in its very short new history, they had a winning record. Couch threw for 2,842 yards, 18 touchdowns, and 18 picks, and for the first time in his career, he also had a winning record. Unfortunately, it ended with a broken leg. Man, this guy would have no luck if it wasn't for bad luck. What this meant was that he did not get the chance to start in the only playoff game that he would ever be a part of. It also opened the door for a QB controversy, as Kelly Holcomb came in and played extremely well in a narrow loss to the Steelers. Holcomb had just so happened to be the backup to Peyton Manning during Arians' time in Indy, and he was brought over as a viable backup to Couch. The problem is, Kelly happened to be too viable, as he would beat out Tim to take over as the starter in 2003 in what was a back-and-forth QB battle. Couch would play in 10 games, starting 8, but his time in Cleveland was coming to an end. The team regressed to 5-11. His numbers were worse across the board, and he was released prior to the 2004 season. By this time though, he had a rotator cuff injury that would sideline him for the next year, and he never really recovered from the shoulder injury. Bruce Arians has vouched for Tim Couch as a victim of injuries and circumstance, rather than a draft bust, saying the following: "Tim was no bust. It kills me when people call him a bust. His arm was just so torn up he couldn't play anymore. He would have been a real good one." And honestly, I tend to agree with Bruce's sentiments. There wasn't a quarterback in the league who would have been able to overcome what Cleveland put on the field in those first 3 seasons. Could they have won more games? Maybe. Probably. But nobody was leading the Cleveland Browns to Super Bowl contention from 1999 to 2001. It was an absolute disaster. One that ruined a young QB in the process. At least the job pays well, because Tim Couch's NFL career earnings were north of $20 million. So even if his professional dream became a complete nightmare, he at least obtained generational wealth. He can also lean back on the fact that there were 2 quarterbacks taken in the same draft who had much worse careers than Couch. So there's that. Again, people, I'm just looking for positives. What do you think? Would Tim Couch have been successful if he was taken second by the Eagles? Would McNabb have had a better run in Cleveland than Couch did? I think the Browns' offensive line would have been a problem for any QB in the NFL who was asked to helm that offense, not just rookies. But let me know what you think.
It's almost disheartening to think about when guys that are as talented as you were and had so much potential to be a Hall of Famer at that level end up at a dysfunctional organization.
You don't understand. I could have had class. I could have been a contender. I could have been somebody.
David Carr.
The Houston Texans select David Carr, quarterback from Fresno State.
As we move into our second name, you're going to recognize a familiar pattern and story. In 2002, a young Fresno State QB was seen as the best quarterback in the draft. His name? David Carr. He was a star quarterback with a cannon for an arm and about to be asked to lead a new franchise into the league's future. It was the NFL's latest expansion franchise, named the Houston Texans, and another team replacing one that moved away. This time though, they were not going to be allowed to keep the original team history. Seriously, I can't be the only one that finds it odd that the Browns kept their history, right? It just feels a bit wrong to me. But, like I said before, I guess whatever. Instead of glory, Carr's NFL career became a cautionary tale. Similar to Tim Couch, he entered what can only be seen as less than ideal circumstances. But let's start just before the draft in Fresno, California, where a star quarterback was asserting himself as the best in his class. Carr led Fresno State to national prominence as a senior, taking down higher profile opponents like Colorado, Oregon State, and Wisconsin, and leading his team to an 11-3 record. His ability to make every throw on the field and remain calm under pressure caught the attention of NFL scouts, and his 4,300 passing yards paired with 42 touchdowns probably didn't hurt. By the end of his college career, Carr was a Heisman finalist and projected as the top quarterback prospect of the 2002 NFL Draft. It was every young QB's dream, but the excitement of being the Texans franchise quarterback also came with immense challenges. As we saw in Tim Couch's career, building an expansion team from scratch is no easy feat. In April 2002, the Houston Texans selected David Carr as their first ever draft pick. He was seen as the future, a player who could lead the team from scratch to success. But Carr faced the same dilemma as Couch. How do you succeed as a young quarterback in basically what is an NFL startup? The answer? You don't.
Do you think if you had gone later in the draft, but maybe to a better team, that maybe you would have had a better career instead of getting sacked 65 times every year?
Yeah, there's no doubt.
Houston built a flawed roster, mostly because it didn't exist the year before. The Texans' offensive line was a glaring weakness, and I do mean glaring. Carr's rookie season would shape the rest of his career, and it was a very, very dented shape by the end of his rookie season. Carr was sacked a jaw-dropping 76 times that year.
What did you say?
76, a record that still stands today. One that we can all be sure David Carr wishes he didn't hold. Every snap seemed like a battle for survival as defenders flooded through a porous offensive line. Carr spent more time running for his life than reading defenses or making plays. An expansion team like the Texans already faces unique struggles. Limited talent, inexperienced players, and a front office still learning how to build a competitive roster. Unfortunately for Carr, he bore the brunt of all of these growing pains. The stunning part is that the front office never really addressed the offensive line in a meaningful way in the draft or free agency. And without adequate protection or a reliable supporting cast, Carr's confidence began to erode. Quarterbacks thrive on rhythm, confidence, and timing, all of which were stripped away from Carr during his early years in Houston. The relentless pressure affected more than just his stats. It took a psychological toll. As sacks piled up, Carr developed what analysts call happy feet. This means he had a tendency to anticipate pressure even when it wasn't there, leading to rushed throws, poor decisions, and missed opportunities. The hits weren't just physical, they were mental. While Carr's natural talent was evident, the Texans' inability to build a competitive offensive line stunted his development. Year after year, Carr was placed in a system where survival, not success, became the goal. Despite the chaos around him, Carr still found moments that would remind fans why he had been the first overall pick. His arm strength and accuracy, when he was given time, was undeniable. In 2004, he threw for 3,500 yards, a career high, and he led the Texans to a 7-9 record, their best in franchise history. He also built a clear connection with the Texans' Hall of Fame 2003 first-round pick, Andre Johnson. These flashes of brilliance gave fans hope that with the right support, Carr could still flourish. But those moments were too few and far between, and completely overshadowed by the persistent struggles of the Texans roster. It was simply too much to overcome. By 2006, the Texans decided to move in a new direction. Was it fair? No. But that's how the NFL works. It's not based on fairness. It's based on results, often without considerations for situations. Some guys are a 6th-round pick who get to wait around for a year, while one of the greatest coaches of all time creates a winning culture. And other guys land on expansion teams. It's not fair. These expansion teams are organizations that have no clear path to winning, no clear plan for developing them, and no real chance for success. After 5 seasons and 249 sacks, let that sink in, 249 sacks, Carr's time in Houston mercifully came to an end. The franchise opted not to renew his contract, and Carr was released. Can I just say, averaging 50 taken sacks a year is crazy. For reference, it's only 54 less than Peyton had for his entire career, but in a third of the seasons. It's 60% of the number that Drew Brees took during his entire time in the NFL, and 45% of Tom Brady's. It's more than any of the following have taken in their respective careers so far: Patrick Mahomes, Lamar Jackson, Jared Goff, and Josh Allen. All of these guys have at least 7 seasons in the NFL, and they've all taken less than 200 total sacks. David Carr took his 249 sacks in just 5 years. Sure, some of these could be blamed on Carr, but a lot of them were the fault of bad offensive line play and coaching decisions that put a young QB in bad spots. Carr would go on to be blamed for some of Houston's struggles, citing his lack of growth and decision-making, and this could be true, but the guy was practically running for his life the whole time. And that's what others would argue, that Houston's front office and coaching staff had failed Carr by not providing him the tools he needed to succeed. The truth probably lies somewhere in between those two positions. Which side do you land on though? Was Carr let down by the Texans, or did he just develop too slowly? For me, I think it was organizational failure. But let me know what you think in the comments. After leaving Houston, Carr would spend several years as a backup with teams like the Carolina Panthers, the New York Giants, and the San Francisco 49ers. And while he never regained his starting role, Carr remained respected as a teammate and a mentor. In 2011, Carr earned a Super Bowl ring as Eli Manning's backup with the New York Giants. It couldn't have been the way that he imagined getting a ring, but it was a meaningful reward for a career that had been filled with adversity. David Carr's NFL story is a complicated one. His raw talent and potential were undeniable, but his career is marred by a struggling expansion franchise, relentless pressure, and the physical and mental toll of all those early sacks. And ultimately, this defined his journey. Carr's numbers don't reflect the player he could have been in a different environment. It's a shame that he wasn't taken in a different draft class, or even taken by a different team, because he had the talent. Situations matter, and for him, like Tim Couch, the situation could not have been much worse. But what do you think? Was David Carr simply a victim of circumstances, or was he not good enough to be an NFL starting QB?
We were always fighting an uphill battle. Charlie Casually, he comes on the show all the time on HQ. I talked to him around the network, and he said just straight out, he's like, I just wouldn't have drafted you if I knew we couldn't have protected you.
I was wondering what would break first. Your spirit or your money.
Expansion franchises are often set up to be pretty bad in the first few years in any sport, and that's to be expected. But being the first ever pick by an expansion team means that you're going to be tied to those failures. For Tim Couch and David Carr, it tarnished their professional reputations. They were labeled as busts and lumped in with other underperforming draft picks without regard for their situation. It isn't a fair representation of what truly happened in their careers, though. Each was ultimately a victim of their circumstances and being too good in the wrong draft class. Would David Carr or Tim Couch have found success in alternate situations? I think so, but let me know what you think. Would either of these two have found success in alternate situations? I think so, but let me know what you think. This has been The Unlikely Success.
The first thing that goes with these quarterbacks is your confidence. And then you get into bad habits. And then all of a sudden you want the ball out of your hands. You don't want to be running for your life.